running up to the Clásico, you're now getting a sense in La Liga that these two sides are on a level of form where there just isn't a lot of margin for error. You have to get victory upon victory upon victory, especially against the sides that are in the bottom half of the table.
Yeah, it feels like the old days between Real Madrid and Barcelona, where they are clearly, obviously they've been at the top of the league for a very long time, but where every single week the results count because these teams are not going to lose a whole lot of games against the rest of the competition. And today was a perfect example for Barcelona because it really wasn't the best performance from the Blaugranas today. It's not, clearly missing Lamine Yamal, and we'll get into that in just a second, but important for them to still find ways to get results even when not playing their best and getting a really poor moment from the goalkeeper to put them in a bind early in the match.
Yeah, I think we saw as well at times last season, even in games in which they were able to get results, they weren't always victories in games like this. If they gave away a goal or made a mistake, sometimes it would get worse. And even though they won the title, there were games where you're wondering, where are they going to find it? But Barcelona, and you see there, based off the momentum chart and based off of the statistics of possession and off everything, that you would think that Barcelona were utterly dominant in the game, but that just wasn't my feeling. Eric García had work to do in goal for Barcelona, and I feel like Oviedo had their moments where they made life uncomfortable. They're obviously presenting a completely different option in Solomon Rondon up front as a big striker that's going to try and bully those defenders. And I think Oviedo more than held their own in the game, and in some ways it felt inevitable that Barcelona would go and get that second, that third, and they duly did. But I think the lineup choices, it's so interesting. Last year I really felt like they had locked down who their 11 was, but Hansi Flick is using this early part of the season to experiment. He's experimenting with Ferran Torres being up front in that center forward role instead of Lewandowski. He's experimenting with using Casado in that midfield instead of De Jong. He's holding Dani Olmo out of the team a fair bit, even with Fermin Lopez and Gavi out injured. So he's experimenting a fair bit. They're figuring things out. I don't think this was anything like their best performance, even though the statistics might show you otherwise, but they get all 3 points, and that's all that matters.
Yeah, and you mentioned the lineups. Obviously, Lewandowski comes off the bench, gets the winner. Again, all of his goals coming off of the bench. It is interesting. The options that Hansi Flick has in that attack, despite some of the injuries, it's still very positive. And you saw here today, Marcus Rashford getting in. He does get the assist late. Maybe not the best game from him compared to what we saw in the Champions League when they played against Newcastle. Ferran Torres gets to start. He has been good every time he's given an opportunity, but he does have all of these options. And I think he's seeing how important it is to use all of these options with the fixture congestion and with obviously the injuries to Fermin Lopez and obviously Lamine Yamal.
Yeah, and I think that's a big thing. I think you compare to last season, he's going to have to figure out a different way to go about this because they played so many games last season with such high intensity. There were injuries over the course of the year. There are injuries now. And so I think he has to figure out how to not just manage a 38-game La Liga season, but a 60 to 65-game overall campaign between cup competitions and the Champions League. So I think you look at how Hansi Flick is managing this early part of the season. He clearly has the long term in mind. Not even just within this season, but also by playing Ferran instead of Lewandowski, you're signaling that you're thinking about what life without Lewandowski is going to look like. And I think Barcelona have to start thinking about that now because there is but so much longer he's going to continue at this level, Lewandowski. You have to think about depth options all over the pitch, figuring out what that back line is going to be with the number of changes that they've made, particularly Inigo Martinez coming out of the side. And here are the players that started today or played today in the attack. Dani Olmo is an interesting one, came in for such a big fee, but I don't feel like quite has the full confidence of the manager. Marcus Rashford getting the assist from the corner, but I still think is figuring out his fit within his side. Came up with huge moments in the Champions League against Newcastle, but what does it look like game in and game out, in the rhythm, in the flow, in a team that values possession, that values combination play, and values ideas in the final third? Rashford, I think, is very good at times figuring them out for himself. The question is, can he figure them out in the collective of this Barcelona side and the way that they like to play? So I still think there are things that they're figuring out. It's interesting that it looks like in this early season, Real Madrid, I don't want to say have a clearer identity, but I think they have a clearer idea of who they're going to be in 2 months' time than maybe Barcelona do right now. And obviously part of that is the injuries forcing that, but I think also part of it is Hansi Flick is using the early part of this season in games that they presume that they can win to figure some things out about who this team is going to be longer term. And then when Yamal comes back, they can go on and explode from there.
We're splitting hairs here, but of course, when you talk about these two teams, I think many believed off the bat early in the season, Barcelona coming in after the season and winning the title last year, that they're clearly a bit ahead in this new iteration of both of these teams. But it does seem like Real Madrid just have a little bit more firepower early in the season? What are your thoughts? Is it just way too early to decide which one of these teams are going to be going on and having more success? You need to see maybe a matchup, El Clásico, to really kind of gauge?
Yeah, and I think as well, even this weekend, we'll talk about it later in the show, but the Madrid derby as well between Real and Atleti. Again, it's measuring yourself against the top teams in the league. Right now, though, we're at a point of the season where it's about getting victories by any means necessary. And I think some Barcelona fans might rightly argue that you say Real might have some more firepower, but they have fewer goals so far in this season. So I do think this is decided over the longer term. You mentioned this is a tight title race where the margin for error is slim. You might have to win 27, 28, 29 games to go win the league this year, where maybe in the past that standard wasn't quite so high. But I do think that in the overall, Barcelona, I still think is figuring some more things out, especially Lamine Yamal is out right now. We don't know if there might be another injury down the line or someone else might get hurt. They have to figure out what the solutions are. Whereas I think Real are a bit more fortunate right now where I think they're just figuring out what their 11 is. They're playing young players. They're going for it again and again and again with Mastantuono and Arda Güler and some of these players that you might not expect to be key figures in the team but have become key figures in the team. So I think for Barcelona, I think today was a decent performance. It wasn't a great performance, but I still think that, to your point, you're figuring things out right now. It's not quite at its absolute brilliant best, which we saw mid-season to the second half of last year, where they were just absolutely sensational game in and game out. And maybe we are holding them against that incredibly high standard, where they were just electric in games. And so because they aren't completely electric, blowing teams away, maybe it's not quite that same feeling this year.
It's fair, and I think you watch this the Real Madrid team out there, and I think you're now starting to see what the best 11 is. I don't think we can see the Barcelona's best 11 because of the injuries either.
Yep.
So it is difficult to kind of gauge it on based on that. What I do know is that I'm expecting an absolute whale of a title race between these two sides.
Yes.
And let's see if Atletico can get in. That's another weird situation. They needed a hat trick from Julian Alvarez yesterday to get into that match. And like you mentioned earlier, we'll be talking about the Madrid derby this weekend later on in the show, because that's obviously going to go a long way to decide who is going to be the champion in La Liga. But I do think that we will see Lamine Yamal, if he gets healthy again, they need to really protect him. Because we saw this game today. We mentioned that they weren't at their best. Part of the reason is because they missed Lamine Yamal. Yeah. You can say what we want about his age. There's no doubt about his impact on this team and how he really builds into the attack and how he drags defenders with him. And you're seeing just the value of this player when he's not on the pitch for Barcelona.
Yeah, and I think obviously the conversation of the week was about the Ballon d'Or, and I think that is one of the ways in which statistics don't necessarily capture the value of a player. And I think, for instance, Rafinha was floated a lot for that award. I just don't think he has the same gravity that a player like Lamine Yamal has. And I think gravity is sort of defined, we see it defined in the NBA with how Steph Curry defines defenses by being such a great three-point shooter that other teams defend at a level that maybe other players wouldn't be defended to, and so that opens up the space for everyone else on the floor. I think it's very similar for Lamine Yamal at Barcelona. He's such a threat. You come into the game, if you're an opponent, who are you preparing for? You're preparing for Lamine Yamal and throwing numbers towards that side, making sure that the winger is covering the fullback to make sure that that side is covered. And if he cuts inside, you have covered to block off any of those curling efforts. I just don't think there's anyone else in this Barcelona side that requires quite that level of attention. Maybe beyond Pedri, who I think does deserve that kind of attention for with how good he is in midfield. That's a dictating of the game. Right. It's sort of baked in that you have to cover central midfield. Lamine Yamal is the threat that you have to worry about. And I think when he's not involved, you see it becomes more egalitarian, but who actually is the threat in this team that you're worried about from the opponent beyond the overall collective level of talent? And it just drops off. It's not the same when he's not there. It is remarkable for a player that young to have that status from opponents. But I think in the overall, Barcelona are figuring out what life looks like without him, because it's inevitable. Everyone gets hurt in this modern day where you're playing 60 to 65 games a year.